let's finish up the topology for the head. So assuming that you've got some of the outlines created for some of the main shapes that we talked about in the last lesson, now you're just going to want to fill in everything else. So you can see I've kind of outlined the ear. So then you'll just need to go in and start to fill that ear in. And as you start to work from a lot of geometry down into smaller areas, you may find yourself wanting to create some triangles. So you can do that by clicking here and then just popping that point in. You could also make that into a quad if you wanted to, but we can start to just come in and fill across these different areas. Okay, here we might want to even pop that into a triangle so that we make that as optimized as possible. And then you come up in here, kind of fill this in. In some of these areas, you will have to go to from a lot of geometry, maybe to less geometry. And so you can do that simply by routing those edges into a triangle. So let's say, for instance, right here, we could come in, make that into a triangle, and now we have a new quad here, and then that flows across. Shift will let you kind of smooth everything out again. Maybe we can add that in. And so you just want to start kind of connecting up these different disparate shells that you have here, and eventually you'll get to the point where you've got it all filled in. And working symmetrically lets you see what you're doing on both sides at the same time, and so you can really quickly sort of fill this in. You can see I've kind of filled in across the back here, and you can kind of go as quickly as you want to. Again, kind of smoothing this out as you go. And then I'm going to come in here and just put points kind of at the center line. And that will enable me to get that central geometry created as well. Okay. Anywhere you have low spots and high spots, you probably want to have points that are close by, just so you can get that silhouette and the shape. If there are spots where it is more open and flat, those may be areas where you don't have to have that much geometry. And so just using the tools that we talked about, continue to kind of fill things in. For instance, down here, I want to have geometry kind of in the low spot of the mouth, and where it changes direction, I'll want to have a point like that, kind of putting that in the lowest spot. And then I'll have another point kind of up here at this higher spot. So we'll get that shape of that mouth in there. Keeping in mind that we will have normal maps for this. And so, you know, a lot of this smaller detail that we'll create, that is on here and that we'll create in Painter, we're going to be able to get through geometry like this. And I'm just kind of following along the topology that we have. Again, in areas that are really specific, focus on those maybe first. And then in areas where it doesn't need to be as specific, then you can just kind of fill in however is the most optimal method, versus trying to, you know, take an existing topological layout and trying to make it fit with detail that you have. You can do it this way instead. Kind of route that in here. So you can see how I'm sort of closing in these specific areas, you know, and then once you've got those, it's a little bit easier to start filling them in. You can always undo if you accidentally add something in there that's not working the way that you want. Kind of pull these points out a little bit. We know that we want to have the points in the very inner part of the mouth. And so we'll use that to kind of guide us for these other bits. And just like with the body, you can start by making a nice clean grid if you want to, and then go back later and kind of optimize in those areas that aren't as needed. So for instance, you've got the resolution you need here, but you may not need it down here. And so you can actually take this and start to, you know, triangulate that, make it a little bit more low res and more optimized. Now remember these are the points that actually intersect with the shirt collar. I'm actually going to extend that down just a little bit. So I'm going to keep the position of the points, but I'm going to make sure that I have geometry that goes down into the collar a little bit more, kind of like that. You don't have to go all the way to the bottom of the next geometry. except maybe right here where this V is. And then you'll want to kind of fill that in underneath the chin. Kind of move those wherever we need to. Kind of filling this under the chin here. And you can come in and extrude. So we could extrude this whole part off of here, then kind of move these points where we need to. Hitting shift to clean that up. Again, taking those edge areas and kind of closing in. So now we've got this, spot that's closed in. We've got this spot, this spot, this spot, and then you just need to kind of slowly go in and kind of fill those in with geometry. Keeping in mind that you want it to be fairly optimized. You want to be able to get the main shapes. You want to be able to get the silhouette without having a lot of facets, without a lot of extra unneeded geometry. But again, this isn't a final product. You can always go back in and tweak things, which is something really nice about this tool. All right, so you can see we're starting to get more areas closed in. Come up here and start to connect some of these areas up. And you can start to kind of work through this pretty quickly once you get kind of the idea of the layout you want. And then again, you'll have areas like this. You could either, add a point in here, or you could add a triangle in there and kind of cut it off. So kind of up to you. I'm going to try to keep that edge at the edge of this detail that we have here, even though the smoothing wants to kind of move it. So like right here, we could have a triangle here and then kind of going across if we wanted to. Same thing here. Or you could, additionally, you could add extra edges there. And then you'll want to keep extending this across. And I'll put an edge right at the center, just in case we need to kind of mirror this. Kind of helps with symmetry, but it doesn't have to be a line there. So again, look at that. Another hole we're starting to close in and fill in. Same thing over here. Same thing here. We can start to come in and fill this across, and we can decide, I'm going to make this a couple of edges wide. Pop that together. And now we've got another area closed in. Another area closed in. So we're really, really close to filling this in. And I would take the eyes, I would take them in and maybe one more line in, but you don't have to close that in, or you can close it in later, but I wouldn't worry too much about filling that in. You can fill it in across, and then we would just need to take it and move the geometry, because I know that this high-res geometry is a little bit too flat and it kind of cuts through the eye. And so we will need to modify that if you close that in. Okay, so go ahead and fill in the rest of the gaps here that you have. Again, knowing that's not going to be exactly the same as this one, but using the same kind of idea where you're working on the main shapes, creating those, and then filling in the gaps between those. And then you can go back in and kind of optimize things if you need to after that. Okay, so something like that. We could have triangles here, fill that in, and we can kind of smooth that out. All right, and it can be pretty low res up here at the top because we're going to be getting a lot of detail with our maps. All right, so the next thing that we want to do, once we've got our head geometry done, the next thing that we're going to work on are the eyes. And so in the next lesson, we'll have this finished and we'll come in and build some eyes for our game model. So we'll do that next. Now let's create some eyes for our character. So here is the head and body geometry that we have right now. This is what I ended up with for the head. And so we need to create some eyes that'll fit right inside here. So let's go ahead and hide our geometry here, and we'll just build it at the origin. So the first thing I'll do is create a polygon primitive sphere. Go ahead and take a look at the sphere. Let's rotate it 90 degrees just so that our pole is facing forward, just because. And let's take a look at the resolution. So looking at the resolution, this is going to be real-time model. And so we're not going to have the opportunity to smooth this. So we actually might want to make the base geometry a little bit higher resolution than we would if we were going to be smoothing this at render time. And so let's take a look. We've got along the axis and along the height. Along the height, you can see they're pretty thin. And so I actually want to make sure and take those down a little bit. So we're looking at 2012, and I just want to look at kind of the silhouette of it. And we can take this and smooth the edges, soften the edges. And so if you're good with that silhouette, then you can stick with something like this. Now I want to make the eye out of 3 pieces. So we're going to have the outer piece, and then we're going to have an inner piece, and then we're going to have the pupil. And so let's take this piece here. We'll go ahead and duplicate another one. The first one, I'm going to just scale up just slightly, and then I'm going to hide it. Let's actually call it eye outer, and then let's hide it. Now this piece is going to be the main part of the eye. And this eye it sticks out of the side of the character's head, but we still want it to focus forward. And so it's going to be a little bit different than the normal eye that's set in the front, where you can see kind of the front, but everything else is covered. And so we are going to see a little bit more of the side of the eye. And so I want to bring the iris, instead of having it be a small iris kind of right back here, I want to bring it all the way back kind of in this range. And so to do that, I'm simply going to go to the side view here, and let me turn off our cameras in this view. And then I'm going to take these points and just move them back, kind of move them back like that. You can also scale if you want to, but I'm not working with very many of them, so it's easy to kind of do this. You could also, like I said, come in here, maybe scale them down, move them back a little bit, something like that. All right. Let's go ahead and take our inside faces here, and I'm going to turn off symmetry. I think I've got symmetry turned on here. And then I'll go ahead and scale this up just a little bit. So this is going to be the size that you want your pupil to be. So, somewhere in this range. You can have it be smaller if you want more of a focused look. So I'm going to make it something like that and go ahead and push it in a little bit. And then just to create a nice sharp line there, I'm going to go ahead and extract this. So go to Edit Mesh, Extract. And we'll take that piece of geometry. Shift P will drop it out of that hierarchy. We can center our pivot, and we can kind of scale it down from the side view. Get something flat. And then I'll move it back inside here and scale it up. Something like that. And then we can go ahead and drop this out with Shift P, select all of these pieces and delete the history. Let's group them together with a Control G. We'll call this eye group, and then we'll call this eye inner and eye pupil. I'm going to go ahead and leave the outer eye turned off for right now. Let's grab this whole thing. We'll turn the head and body back on, and then we'll take that eye group. It's going to need to be scaled, but let's move it up into position so we can see where it goes here. And so we'll scale it up a bit, kind of rotate it, move it back into position here. We can turn our outer eye back on. So we're looking at something like that. And then if you want to, you can come in to your hypershade, let's just create a quick blend. I'll assign it to this outer part of the eye, and then in with the blend selected, go ahead and increase the transparency. Then if you want to decrease the eccentricity, you can do that just as a temporary method to be able to see through the eye. And then you can go in and scale it a little bit more as needed. Also, it's pointing completely straight forward. You may need to rotate it in a little bit to get more of the kind of predatory look. Otherwise, you can get kind of a wall-eyed kind of effect sometimes. All right, so you just want to put it in position kind of like that. And I think the resolution may even be a little bit high, but I think it'll work. It gives us a nice smooth silhouette for the eye. So once you've got that done, the next thing we'll do is we're going to build a necklace. So a piece that we don't have at all. And we're going to use quad draw in a way that we haven't really used before to create a completely new piece of geometry. But we're going to use the base